So here we are. We're actually getting ready to close out this book Vayikra, this book Leviticus, and we talked about holiness being the central theme throughout the entire book, and it really is. And so, in the process of finding out what holy is, I hope that we're learning what it means to be a holy people, because God says you are to be holy because He is holy. So He first tells us, well, okay, what does that mean that He is holy? So He explains what that means to be a holy God and to be a holy people, all right? Because if we are His people, then we are holy. Amen? Okay, so with that, we need to continue as we're getting ready to close this out. And again, we're kind of wrapping it up, summing it up. You know, the closing of the book, it kind of starts to round out some of the points and bring things back in and kind of reemphasize some of the important parts again, things like that. So what is important as we're getting ready to close out this book, Vayikra, and we're getting ready to go into Bamidbar. Now, Bamidbar, now think about that, because they're at Mount Sinai, right? And they're getting ready to move away from there. They're getting ready to go into the wilderness. Well, I thought they were in the wilderness. No, they camped at the mountain for a while, okay? And so they're getting ready to go into the wilderness. And so everything that the Father was giving them here was in preparation for what they were about to go to. All right, you know, keep in mind, this is something we've talked about a while, that God will equip you now through obedience for what He's asking for later. So if you listen to Him now, it'll build what will help you to come later. We don't always see what's going down the road. We don't always see what's coming, but He knows. And so we follow Him and we learn along the way, right? Okay, so what are the things that were spoken in the mountain, okay? Behar Sinai, in Mount Sinai. I find that amazing. It's not just on Mount Sinai, literally, it's in Mount Sinai. Because He was in the mountain. Remember Moshe, he was put in the cleft of the rock and he was brought into the mountain to be that. And again, there's much you can go on that. I'm not addressing that at this time around. But He is our rock. He is that mountain. And you can look at Mount Zion and all these different things that talk about mountains and relate that to how the Father is doing a work in our lives and what He wants us to hold on to. He is our rock. Amen. But what were the things that were said in the mountain? What are the things? Now we know the 10 words, the 10 commandments, but there's more. Okay, that's what we always go to because that's, the famous thing. That's what everybody knows. But that's not the only things that were spoken from the mountain. The Father was giving them ways of life to help them walk in a way that would bless not just Him, but them and society around them. A truly blessed society will not just worry about themselves, they will bless those in their vicinity as well. Think about this for a moment. Israel, small country, very small, about the size of New Jersey. And how much blessing is Israel to the entire world? I mean, think about the medical advancements. Think about technology. And think about all these things that they're, one of the big things they talk about now is desalinization. I mean, it's huge. What are these things? Is it important to mankind? Yes. And Israel is kind of spearheading all these things to benefit humanity. Wow. That really testifies of something, doesn't it? All right, so what are some of the things that were said? Well, again, we see, as we read through the books, I hope you're seeing there's a progression to what the Father is doing, what He's teaching, because He tells you something, and then a little later, you see why it was relevant. Now, you don't always get to see why it's relevant in the midst of it, but if you continue walking, you'll get to see that it's relevant, right? Kind of like when you're a kid and your parents tell you to do something, you don't understand why you have to do this, but then when you're an adult, you get it. All right. Sometimes in life we just have to experience the things to learn it. All right. So there's a progression with the Word in our lives as well. The Word helps to build. You have to have a foundation before you can build on the foundation, right? Because if you don't have a foundation and you just start to build, it's going to collapse. Okay. And you can't put a roof on something when there's no walls. I mean, it's not the way you do it. So in order for anything to stand, it has to have a good, solid foundation. And this is where we're talking about the rock. We need to make sure that it is built on the rock of Him, the rock of the Most High, and His Word and His ways. We need to make sure we're building on that foundation that He is establishing for us, okay? One of the reasons why I say this is because we talked about the Moedim a little bit last time around. And in the last Parshat and more, We established the importance of the Moedim, and even Shabbat being the first of all the Moedim, because how many of the Moedim that were given include a Shabbat? And so we have to understand, okay, so what is Shabbat before we can see, like, example, like on Yom Kippur. It is a complete Shabbat, but it's a day you deny yourself. You afflict yourself. Well, what does that mean? Okay, so we kind of have to know what the idea behind Shabbat is. And much like we see, how did he explain it? Well, 6 days, work is to be done. But the seventh day, it's a day to stop. It's a day of rest. Now, that's a double-sided command. That means 6 days you work. And then the seventh day is the stop, all right? So this is what we're looking at. There's a progression that we see. One example, we're told to count the days. Now, what do we talk about counting the days? We're in the midst of it right now, actually. What are we counting the days for? It's called counting the Omer. What are we counting the days? Looking towards Shavuot, right? Well, how do we count the days? It says you are to count the weeks. You are to count 7 weeks and count past 7 Sabbaths. And then the 50th day, the next day, is Shavuot. So we're counting a cycle, a period of sevens and 7 sevens. And so we have to look at the cycles that the Father is giving and establishing, right? And this is a foundation. We're talking about the weekly cycles, which, by the way, is why Shavuot is called the Feast of Weeks, because we're counting 7 weeks. Shavuot literally means weeks. Okay? So in this parsha, we're told to count the years. See, last parsha, we were told to count the cycles of 7 days. Right? Into 7 weeks. This time, we're told to count a process of 7 years, flowing into the cycles of 7 years, 49 years, and the 50th being the Jubilee. So again, we have kind of a connection between the Jubilee and Shavuot, right? Because we count them very similar ways. And so they're supposed to be very similar things. Because what was given on Shavuot? The Father gave His Word by His Ruach. That is our inheritance. That is what equips us to walk into the promise. That is what puts us all on the same ground, puts us all on the same plane. Because all who were at Mount Sinai heard the voice of God. Everyone that was there saw and experienced everything that happened there. No one was any better, no one was any worse. Everyone was in it. Okay? And so here, when you get to the Jubilee years, it's supposed to be the same kind of a thing. Every single person was to experience it. Every single person was to taste of the freedom that was given in the boundaries of the word that was established for them. I mean, think about that for a minute. What if, every 50 years, everyone went back to their family land, went back to their family businesses, went back to all of that? Even the cycles of the 7 years, the Shemitah years, where the land stopped and the land rested and debts were released. No more monopolies. I know the businesses don't like that, right? But that helps balance everything. Every 7 years you get a reset button. And the idea is that you would learn from that and not abuse that. Okay? So anyway, let's keep moving. Leviticus 25:11. The 50th year will be a Yovel. That's Jubilee. It means the blast on the trumpets, the blast on the horns. And it says, in the year that you are not to sow and harvest what grows by itself or gather the grapes of untended vines. So in the year you don't sow, you don't harvest, but there will be stuff that will grow by itself, and you can kind of eat from that, but you're not going to do any sowing, and you're not going to do new crops. You're not going to do any of that, okay? And then it says, because it is a Yovel, it will be holy for you. So this is a holy time. We talked about holy time recently, right? This is a holy time. And it says, whatever the fields produce will be food for all of you. So whatever is in the fields will be sufficient, okay? Now, this is an act of faith, isn't it? Because if you say, well, whatever is in the field will be sufficient, whatever is out there will be good for us, that means you still have to go out there and daily, kind of like manna, guys. You still have to go out there and collect what you need for the time, collect what you need for now. You're not going in and harvesting, but you're getting what you need, right? But God is our supply. God is our provision. So as you do so, you are keeping in mind that you only exist because of his goodness. And again, this is just a reminder to the people, it should have been. In the year of Jubilee, every one of you is to return to the land he owns, and this was the 50th year. In the 50th year, every person returned to their inheritance land. Now, what do we mean by that? Guys, when Israel went into the land was divided by lots. Okay? And then there were territories that were given. Territories for the different portions that were established, right? You have different territories that were for each tribe. And so each of these tribes, in the 50th year, everyone went back to their territory that was established within the land. And again, this was a matter of not just so that no one gets too far gone, no one gets too far out, but there's a connection. So many times we forget where we came from. And the Father is establishing a means to be connected back to what he wanted for us from the beginning. And so every 50 years, there's a reconnection to your inheritance and your heritage. And we need to understand both. Okay? So the 7th years are called the years of remission, or Shemitah years, or the years of release. So what happens in the 7th years, we see in Deuteronomy 15, at the end of every 7 years, you were to have a Shemitah. Here is how the Shemitah is to be done. Every creditor is to give up what he has loaned to his fellow member of the community. He is not to force his neighbor or relatives to repay it, because Adonai's time of remission has been proclaimed. Again, can you imagine every 7 years debts are released? Now, this doesn't mean that you get to take advantage of your brother and rack up a whole bunch of debt and say, well, here's the 7th year. He's got to forgive me. Because there's a lot of scripture that tells us do not take advantage of your brother, and it's going to be evident this is what you're doing, okay? But it says don't do that. But at the same side, it says, now don't forsake to lend to your brother when you know the 7th year is coming as well. Again, this is God established boundaries in community and ways of life, even how to conduct business, so that we all are on the same level field. Okay? And much as it should be. Everyone has a right to live. Everyone has a right to work. Everyone has a right to make a living. And so this is so that it doesn't come completely out of balance, where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Everyone has a right to what's there. And this is not a communism either, where everyone works and then it's all divvied up and everyone gets the same. No, because if you worked, you accumulated, you got, and that's that. But then in the 50th years, you went back to your spot, you went back to your inheritance, and you worked again. It was just cycles that the Father was establishing for us. Matthew 6:12-15, we see, says, and forgive us our debts, and I look at that, as we forgive our debtors. So, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. For if you forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you forgive not men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. That's kind of dangerous, isn't it? When we really think about it, because he said, if you forgive, then you'll be forgiven. But if you do not forgive, you're in danger of not being forgiven. You're like, well, did he really say that? Yeah, he really said that. And this is the established from the beginning. The Father wants us to work in unity with one another. Okay? That doesn't mean we're always going to agree, but we need to work in unity with one another. All right? So during the Second Temple era, during the period when Yeshua was here, okay, Jubilee was not observed because nobody knew when to start the counting for the 50th year. Here's the sad part, the sad reality of it. When they went into the land, they never observed it. That's why they were exiled, actually. That's why they were sent into Babylon. Because they did not observe the Sabbath years. So they were sent away. So what we have here is they knew the Shabbat, they knew the 7th years, but they didn't know at what point to start the count to go to 50. So we knew the cycle of every 7 years. We knew the Shabbat, we knew the count, we knew the 6 years, we knew the 7th years, but what 7th year was it? Was it 7, 14, 21, 28, what? They didn't know. And so you're not just going to pick one, are you? No, because you can't do that. Okay, because it's to be proclaimed at a certain time. You can't decide, well, now is the time where we're going to observe this Moedim and let's just do it. No. Again, there's a difference between just honoring and blessing the Father and worshiping in a time of praise and following something that he established at a specific time. Okay? So it was not observed while they were in exile, and they were in exile because it was not observed before. So nobody knew when the last one was to declare when the next one is. Yeah. Sound like some problems we get ourselves into, isn't it? Well, no one knew when the first one happened, so we don't know when to do the next one. That's kind of the point, though. Okay? But there's a few things. Also, it cannot be pronounced without knowing all 12 tribes. Why didn't Yeshua just flat out say, hey, this is when the Jubilee year is? Because it's important. I mean, he hinted at some things, and as far as the restoration of some things that are coming, but why didn't you say it? Because not all the tribes were back in Israel yet. Not all the tribes were known. Because the territory of Israel was divided among all the tribes. And so in the 50th year, everyone from all the tribes went back to the place of land, the plot of land that belonged to their ancestry. You can't do that if they don't know who they are. And we find that in Leviticus 25:10 says, you are to consecrate the 50th year, proclaiming freedom throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It will be a yovel for you. You will return who? Everyone to the land he owns, and everyone is to return to his family. Which means the tribe of Benjamin will go to the land of Benjamin. The tribe of Ephraim will go to the place of Ephraim. The tribe of Dan will go to the place of Dan. Gad will go to Gad. I mean, all of that. So that can only be proclaimed when these are known. So who can do that? Well, the Messiah can do that. Right? So it is believed that when the Messiah comes, he will return all people to the land and declare Jubilee. Does that sound like something we can get on board with? Absolutely. When the Messiah comes, he will declare Jubilee and return all people to the land. I don't know. We kind of read something about this New Jerusalem that all people will go to. You know? I think we can kind of agree with this. It says Jubilee was to be declared on Yom Kippur. Isn't it interesting that it was declared during a time of atonement, during a time of judgment, Jubilee was declared. In other words, so judgment has gone forth, you have been atoned for, so you come out favorable. Let the oppression be released. Yeshua declared the start of this work when he was in the synagogue and he read Isaiah 61. In Luke 4:21 it says, he started to speak to them, says, today as you have heard, this passage in the Tanakh was fulfilled. He was telling them what he was doing and what he was about to establish. To declare the Jubilee years, the Messiah can do that. And this is what he told us to get ready for. So the blessing in the 6th year. This is kind of an interesting thing. Because in the blessing in the 6th year, God says, if you observe the 7th year, then I will bless the 6th year to give you the crop until the new crops come in. This is like manna, guys. Because on the 6th day, you had an extra amount of manna. So the manna was provided to you so that on the 7th, when it's not there, you're provided for. So the preparation, the 6 years, the 6th year is the preparation of what's coming in. You go out, you gather, you prepare, you do the work, but God said he will bless the 6th year to provide you until the new crops. Now understand what that means. In the 7th year, there's no more planting. No new planting until the 8th year. So think about that. So it's not just a blessing to provide in the 7th year, but to provide into the 8th year when that crop starts to grow. But the blessing comes in the 6th year. The blessing comes before the 7th. You know what this means? You have to determine within yourself, before that 6th year, you will observe that 7th year. Because if you do not determine within yourself, you will observe that 7th year, you are not going to get the blessing in the 6th. But if God is providing you that blessing in the 6th, it's to give you the provision for the 7th and into the 8th. And what's the 8th? New beginning. Right? New season, new cycle. Leviticus 25:20. So the decision was made in the 6th year. But it says this. And if you say, well, what shall we eat in the 7th year if we don't sow or gather in our crop? God knows us, doesn't he? Yeah. So he says, so in the 6th year collect and do stuff, but do not plant anything new in the 7th year. And if you say, well, what are we going to eat then? Which is exactly what we say, right? Because we're worried about the things of the physical world, right? Because this is where we dwell. This is where we're at. This is the fact of life. And he says, so if you say, what shall we eat in the 7th year, if we may not sow or gather our crop, I will command my blessing on you in the 6th year, so that it will produce a crop sufficient for 3 years. The 6th year, the 7th year, and the 8th year. Wow. So when you sow in the 8th year, you will be eating some of the old crop. You shall eat the old until the 9th year when its crop arrives. That's amazing, isn't it? God says that he will bless this time if we declare we're going to be faithful. He will show his faithfulness. Right? So to honor and keep Shabbat, it is an act of faith, isn't it? Sometimes it's a test of faith, isn't it? Because we have to make the decision beforehand that we are going to honor it. It's not something you just do. It's not something that's just a matter of fact. It's a decision that is made, right? It's an act of faith that you do so. But even more so, it's an act of obedience. An act of obedience, but obedience can come without faith. You can be obedient just because you know it's the right thing to do. But an act of faith is obedient, knowing that God will bless and God will provide. Right. It's a different heart, right? So this teaches us that our provision is from Yahweh, not from anything else. Again, we see Leviticus 23:3. Work is to be done in 6 days, but the 7th day is a Shabbat of complete rest, a holy convocation. You are not to do any kind of work. It is a Shabbat for Adonai, even in your homes. So this is the time that God has established. And this is the idea for the 7th years as well. Can you imagine? In the 7th years, no more, you're not planting, harvesting, doing any of these other things. So what are you going to be doing to fill in your time? You're going to be studying. You're going to be spending time with the family. You're going to be working to build up the community. You're going to build up one another. And imagine, every 7 years, you get time off your job for the sake of studying and building up the family and community. Wow. But that's the way the Father wanted it to be. So who does the land belong to? The land belongs to Yahweh, period. And he gave it to Israel. The thing is, when he gave it to Israel, he didn't just give it to them. Okay, he said he gave this to them as an inheritance, as a possession. It is theirs, but they don't really own it. If you want to say they lease it, so to speak. They don't really own it. God owns the land because he said he's going to keep the land. He wants it to stay holy. He wants it to be something set apart for him. He owns the land. But he put his people in charge of it. And he told them to work in it and to do what needed to be done in it. Okay, we see Leviticus 25:23. The land shall not be sold in perpetuity, for the land is mine, and you are strangers and sojourners with me. Exodus 19:5 says, Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all people, for all the earth is mine. Psalm 24:1, a psalm of David. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and the world and those who dwell therein. So who owns the land? Yahweh owns the land. Who has the right to be in the land? Israel, period. We see in the process of this, talking about the Jubilee years and why this is important, we see the idea of a Redeemer coming forward. The kinsman Redeemer. This is important because if we get an idea of this, we understand what was done for us. We understand what Yeshua did for us and what he was establishing for us. Okay? The word Redeemer is Ga'al. Goel is a Redeemer. The word to redeem is Ga'al. All right? And it means to redeem or to be the next of kin. In other words, to be the next of kin, you have the right to buy back a relative's property, or you have the right, kind of like a power of attorney kind of a thing. You have the right to do something on their behalf if they can't do it for themselves. Okay? So this was a legal issue, but at the same time, it was to better the whole community of Israel. The example is to be the next of kin, to buy back a relative's property, to marry his widow, etc. Also to be the avenger of blood. Remember, if someone had killed someone and it was a mistake, it was manslaughter, not murder, then the avenger of blood could go after him. But if he went to one of the safe cities, then he was safe there for a period of time. And then once the high priest died, then he was declared free from that. Okay? Again, interesting that once the high priest dies, those that were guilty can be set free. Anyway, so we're moving on. Ge'ulah is a word for redemption, restoring something, whether if it's a land or a house or a person, restoring something to its proper place that it had been beforehand. Now, the beautiful thing is that when God redeems something, when God restores something, it's always better than it was. So when God restores, he doesn't just restore, but he grows it and makes it better. Boy, I can't wait for the new heavens and new earth, huh? So we need to understand that God redeemed Israel. I mean, if we say that he redeems us, we need to understand he redeemed Israel as well. Because the fact that he can redeem us shows what he established before. All right? So when they came out of Egypt, there was more happening than just rescuing from oppression. He was not just bringing them out because they were oppressed. He was not just bringing them out because they were slaves. He was redeeming them. The Pharaoh laid claim to them, and he was redeeming them, showing that they belonged to him. Yahweh was showing his right as a redeemer like a father, the next of kin, like a father. You would say, a father or a brother, something like that, but Yahweh was acting like a father. He was redeeming his people. He said, Israel is my firstborn. They're his holy people, set apart, right? So how does he have the right to redeem? Because he made you. The craftsman has right to what he made. Kind of like a copyright, intellectual copyright. That which you write, that which you create, that which you do, you have the right to call it yours. Well, God made you. He has the right to call you his. Right? And that's why he extended a way for you to come into that covenant with him. Right? We're talking about restoration that was established from the very beginning. Leviticus 25:24 says, so in all the country you possess, you shall allow a redemption of the land. So again, the land could be redeemed. What does that mean? Well, let's keep reading. If your brother becomes poor and sells part of his property, then his nearest redeemer shall come and redeem what his brother has sold. If a man has no one to redeem it, and then himself becomes prosperous, and he finds sufficient means to redeem it, then let him calculate the years since he sold it and pay back the balance to the man to whom he sold it, and then return to his property. But if he has not sufficient means to recover it, then what he has sold shall remain in the hand of the buyer until when? The year of Jubilee. And in the Jubilee it shall be released, and then he shall return to his property. Now, what happens, say, if someone becomes too poor to work the land or too poor to do so, and they can't do this, well, they will sell the land to somebody else. Now, what's a fair price for the land? This is where it's established. It's not just a matter of, well, this is how much the land is worth. It's not really the land. It's what's in the land. The seed, the crops. It's what's in the land is what's important. So say we're 25 years in, we're going to look at 25 years worth of crops that are going to be established that we have to pay a price for. Okay? If we're 10 years in, then we're looking at 40 years. If we're 48 years in, then we're only looking at 2. All right? So this is what we're looking at. But the idea is, if someone is poor and destitute and down on their luck and they sell off the land and say their brother hears about it and says, what did you do that for? I could have given you the money. He has the right to go to the person he sold the land to and say, I want to redeem it. How much did you buy it for? And they calculate the price and he can buy it back. But if nobody can do that, but in the 50th year, it goes back anyway. See? The thing that's wild about this is that the idea is that every single person at some point in their life has experienced at least one Jubilee year. Think about that. Leviticus 25:47. So if a stranger or sojourner with you becomes rich and your brother beside him becomes poor and sells himself to the stranger or sojourner with you or to a member of the stranger's clan, then after he is sold, he may be redeemed. One of his brothers may redeem him, or his uncle or his cousin may redeem him, or a close relative from his clan may redeem him, or if he goes rich, he can redeem himself. The idea is, you've heard of debtor's prison? This is kind of a thing. You owed a debt to somebody, you can't pay it, you are now in their service. You work it off. Okay? So this is similar, not exactly the same thing, but similar to that. If you say, I don't have money, I've done this, and I'm down on my luck, and there's nothing I can do, and my family, I got to take care of what am I going to do? You can sell yourself to somebody else's servitude. They will care for you and your family in exchange for you serving them. If your brother hears about this and says, well, I can't allow that. You should be free. You don't have to do that. He can go and be a redeemer for this person and say, what was the price you guys agreed on, and he can buy him back. Okay? So that he can be free. Or if in the process of working for this other person, he gets some money and he makes some wise investments and he has his amount of money, he can buy himself out. Say, okay, we made an agreement for this much. I've worked off this much. This is what I owe you. Here it is. Okay, so he could even do that for his own. But verse 50, he shall calculate with his buyer from the year when he sold himself to him until the year of Jubilee, and the price of his sale shall vary with the number of years. The time he was with his owner shall be rated as the time of a hired servant. And if there are still many years left, he shall pay proportionately for his redemption for some of his sale price. So if there remain but a few years until the year of Jubilee, he shall calculate and pay for his redemption in proportion to his year of service. Verse 53. He shall treat him as a servant hired year by year. He shall not rule ruthlessly over him in your sight. And if he is not redeemed by these means, then he and his children with him shall be released in the year of Jubilee anyway. Okay, so again, there's a period of time. So the idea is that every person at some point in their life has experienced the Jubilee that the Father is wanting us to walk in. Okay? One of the biggest examples that we have as far as the Redeemer goes is Ruth. We talk a little bit about Ruth here to put it in the context of the kinsman redeemer and what was established. And kind of interesting that for Shavuot, the book of Ruth is read as well. Why is the book of Ruth read during Shavuot? Because it took place during the barley harvest, which is April-ish, during the times of counting the Omer, during the times of preparation for Shavuot. Okay? So a couple things that we're going to look at in regards to Ruth. First, the backstory, so you know what's going on. Elimelech and Naomi are the two people we're really talking about, because these are the people who lived in Israel at the time of the judges. Okay? And so there was a famine in Israel, and because there was a famine in Israel, they upped and moved to the area, to the territory, to the plains of Moab. Who was Moab? And Moab was descendant of Lot, right? And Moab is also, the stories of Balaam and Balak. Balak was a Moabite. And the daughters of Moab went into the people of Israel and taught them to pull away from the Torah and to be involved in idolatry, to eat things sacrificed to idols, and to do all of those things. Moabites. That's why God said the Moabites, you will have no portion with the Moabites. Okay? But we know that God is a covenant God. And he made a covenant with his people, Israel. And anyone who was willing to be a partaker of that covenant he established can. Right? So there's hope. Ruth was a Moabite. How could she be among Israel if she was a Moabite? Because she professed faith. She changed. She didn't serve the idols. She didn't live the way of Moab anymore. She lived for Israel. So we're going on. So there, his sons married Moabites. Okay, so Elimelech and his sons died. Some I don't know if you want to call it midrash or whatever, discussion, say that they died because they were in disobedience by going to Moab, because they weren't told to go to Moab. They just did it. I don't know. But for what it's worth, it's kind of odd that he and his sons died. Right? That's something to at least take a look at. So Naomi heard that Yah had visited Israel and had given them food. So she took her 2 daughters-in-law and told them, return to their families, maybe they can find another husband. They're like, I have no more sons to give you. I have nothing left to offer you. There's nothing else I can do for you. Return back to your family's homes, your widows, you know. Maybe you can find another husband to take care of you. Which means they were still relatively young. Okay? And so she says she's going to go back. And this is Orpah and Ruth. And they both protested a little bit, but Orpah ended up going back anyway. But Ruth said, no, where you go, I go. And it went beyond that. It wasn't just a matter of I love you and I want to stick with you. This was a matter of I will be with you. Where you go, I go. Your God will be my God. Your people will be my people. Where you die, I die. She wasn't just professing loyalty and faith to Naomi, she was professing loyalty and faith to the God that she served. Okay? So now Naomi and Ruth went back to Israel. And we find in Ruth 1:22. So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Interesting. Bethlehem, house of bread. At the beginning of the barley harvest. When is the beginning of the barley harvest? Right around Passover. Okay? So right around Passover, during the time of counting the Omer. So we're talking April-ish. Okay, because, you know, it moves a little bit, but April, okay? This is the time for the barley harvest. And this is the time that they were back. So Ruth went to glean the edges of the field. They're back here. They don't have jobs. They don't have the means for sustenance. They had some stuff, but no way to work it or to do anything. So she went to go glean the field. Now, how is it that she could go glean from the field? How was that acceptable? Because God declared it to be so. God made provision so that anyone who had a need could have it met. They just had to go get it. You know, notice they didn't go knocking door to door to door to door saying, do you need some barley? Do you need some barley? Do you need some barley? They had the provision, but it was there. You go get it. Okay? Leviticus 23:22 says, so when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not make clean riddance of the corners of your field when you reap, neither shall you gather any gleaning of your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am the Lord your God. So even those who have no other means of living can still eat because it's there for them. It was a responsibility that you have the crop that you left for those who didn't have. Ruth 2:3. So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened, I love how it says this, and she just happened. Coincidence? Not at all. God was directing her. It's not a matter of, oh, she just happened to come across this field that belonged to Boaz. Not at all. God was directing her to the field of Boaz. All right? So it says, and she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. So Boaz asked the young men that were working there, guys, who's that girl over there? I've seen her around here. What's her story? Right? And they're like, oh, that's Naomi's daughter-in-law. You know? Because all Bethlehem went up in roars when they found out Naomi had returned, but they knew that she, you know, her husband was gone, her sons were gone, they were going to have it pretty rough. And so he knew somewhat about her when he said, oh, that is Naomi's daughter-in-law. Ruth 2:8-11 reads this way. So then Boaz said to Ruth, listen, my daughter, do not go and glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. This was for safety's sake, too. I mean, it's not like she's out in the field, a bunch of guys that she don't know. Maybe they're not very righteous guys. You know what I mean? You know, we're talking hired hands, workers, and construction, and, you know, those kind of guys, right? Now all the construction workers are going, hey. It's all right, guys. I did it too, okay? I did it too. So here's the idea, though. He says, for safety's sake, don't leave this field. Come back to this field. Don't go into another field. Don't go into somebody else's field. Come back into this field, all right? So then, it says, let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping, and go after them. Have not I charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. He's saying, even that. So when you get thirsty, you can go get something to drink. He didn't have to do that. He could have said, I'm giving you the corners of the field. That's your right. You're entitled to that. Take what you are entitled to. But he said, even when you're thirsty, I'll give you water as well. Okay? So then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and she said to him, why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? She was a Moabite. And Boaz said, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. He said, because of the goodness and the kindness of your heart towards your mother-in-law, which was kin to him, he said, I want to show you kindness because I've seen the kind of person you are. Okay? So Boaz then invited Ruth to eat with them, right? As the evening is starting to come on a little later, they stop, they grab some of the harvest, they roast up the grain, they eat, and he says, hey, Ruth, come on and get some food. I know you're hungry. Come on and eat a little bit too. Then he loads her up and sends her back to take food back to Naomi. And in the process, he tells his young men, guys, when you're gleaning, leave a little extra. Just let a little extra, just fall for her. And matter of fact, some of the stuff that you've already collected, just kind of pull a little bit out for her. He was going above and beyond what he needed to do. This was far beyond his requirement. And this was far beyond what she had the right to. He was wanting to make sure she was taken care of. Okay? So she gathered it in, she took it to Naomi. We read in Ruth 2:19. And her mother-in-law said to her, where did you glean today? And where have you worked? I mean, I'm sure she saw all the food that she brought back. She said, where did you get all this, right? Said, blessed be the man who took notice of you. So she told her mother-in-law, to whom she had worked, and said, this man's name with whom I work today is Boaz. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, this man is a close relative of ours and one of our redeemers. So it was acknowledged, this man is one of our redeemers. And why would that be important? Because here is someone who had the right to redeem them and the heart to do it. It's not just they had the right to, but they don't care. They had the right to it, and they actually did not oppose it. They actually saw it, and they, not just because, well, it's my responsibility, I guess I have to do this. Boaz had the heart to do so because it's what was right. He had the heart to do it. Ruth 3:10. And he said, blessed be you of Jehovah, my daughter. You have dealt more kindly at the latter end than at the beginning. You did not go after the young men, either poor or rich. This is when she approached him. And he's telling her basically, you could have gotten a younger man, you could have went after a younger man, or you could have went after a richer man. Why are you here with me? In other words, it's righteousness that she was doing. She was with him because he was the Redeemer. It was the way God had established it. This is why she was, I don't want to say pursuing him, but this is why she was approaching him, to see if he would be willing to redeem her. And he says, and now, my daughter, do not fear. All that you say I will do to you, for all the gate of my people know that you are an able woman. So he was saying, he knows, not just able, capable, ready to work, willing to work, but she lost her husband, right? And now, surely it is true that I am the kinsman redeemer, but there is also a redeemer nearer than I. We're not told this guy's name. He says, I can redeem you, but there's somebody who is closer in the line to do so. Let's see if he is willing to redeem you. And if he won't, I will. Okay, so again, this is a way, making a way for her, making a provision for them. So he says, stay tonight and it will be in the morning. If he will redeem you, then, well, he will redeem. And if he does not delight to redeem you, as Jehovah lives, then I will redeem you. So lie down until morning. So in the morning came, he loaded her up with more food and sent her back to Naomi. So Boaz, the next day, went to the gate for the city. Why did the gate to the city? Because that's where the elders of the city were. This is where business was conducted with witnesses. This is where things were established. This is where covenants were made. This is where declarations were given. This is where law was taken care of. This is where people were allowed in and out of the city. Okay? So in other words, I have a legal issue to tend to. Right? I went down to the courthouse. So he went down to the gate and he waited for his brother. When his brother walked by, he said, "Hey, bro, come over here. I got some business with you. We need to talk about something." And then he tells him the story. And he says, Boaz asked if he would redeem or purchase his brother's field, and that would benefit Naomi. He said, Naomi and her daughter-in-law is back, and Elimelech's field is out there, and she's willing to sell Elimelech's field because she needs money. Are you willing to buy Elimelech's field? Well, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I could expand my business a little bit right now. You know, I could make some extra money. I could do that. He said he would do that. And then Boaz says, oh, by the way, the deal comes with Ruth. Oh, wait a minute. I can't do that. You go ahead and do it then. Seriously, that's what he said. Why would he say something like that? Well, one, it kind of shows some selfishness, because the reason why he gave is because that puts his family, their inheritance at stake too. Because now he's putting money into somebody else's inheritance. Because now it's a matter of, it's Ruth's child, Ruth and her child. Naomi, Ruth, and her child is the one who's going to benefit from this field. He's like, I'm putting money into this field, and I'm doing all this for them, and they're the one that's going to get the benefit of it. I'm taking away from my family to do that. I'm not going to do that. You go ahead. Essentially is what he was saying. So he says the Redeemer was to raise up a name for his brother so that his brother's family can continue. He didn't take on his name. They took on the name of that line that they were in. So again, he said, well, that's too much for me. You can do it. So an act of redemption gave birth to the King of Israel. Isn't it interesting how an act of redemption gave way for the one who redeems? Because we see Ruth 4:13-17. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and Jehovah gave her conception, and she bore a son. And the woman said to Naomi, Blessed be Jehovah, who has not left this day without a redeemer, and may his name be called in Israel. And may he be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you has borne him, and who is better than you than 7 sons. And Naomi took the child and laid him in her bosom and became a nurse to him. And the neighboring women gave him a name, saying, This is a son born to Naomi. And they called his name Obed, who was the father of Jesse, who was the father of David, who was in the lineage of Yeshua. So we see how an act of redemption on someone's part made way for your Redeemer. Reciprocal? Is God establishing something? When you read the story, you see how everything is happening? When Israel was taken out of Egypt, it was an act of redemption. Guys, when they were pulled out, God was giving his right of redemption over his people. We see in Exodus 6:6-8, he says, I will redeem you. He says, I brought you out, and I will bring you to myself. I will bring you to me, and you will be my people, and I will be your God. Amen. Job 19:25 says, I know that my Redeemer lives. He didn't say my Redeemer lived or will live. He said, my Redeemer lives, and he that shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. He specifically says, my Redeemer is the one that's going to stand at the last day. How did Job know the Messiah? He knew him. 1 Peter 2:5-7 says, you also as living stones are being built a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Yeshua. Because of this, it is also contained in the Scripture, behold, I lay in Zion an elect precious stone, a corner foundation, and the one believing in him shall never in any way be ashamed, which is quoting from Isaiah. Verse 7, then to you who believe belongs the preciousness, but to disobeying ones, he is the stone which those building rejected. This one became the head of the corner, quoting from Psalm 118. Isaiah 48:17 through 19 tells us, thus says the Lord your Redeemer. Says who? Your Redeemer. If we call him Lord, he is your Redeemer. He says, the Holy One of Israel, I am Yahweh your God, who teaches you to profit, who leads you in the way that you should go. Oh, that you had paid attention to my commandments, then your peace would have been like a river, and your righteousness like the waves of the sea. Your offspring would have been like the sand, and your descendants like its grains, and their name would never be cut off or destroyed from before me. He is our Redeemer. He lives, and he establishes the ways of life for us because he redeemed us. All right? So when Yeshua redeems you, there's no doubt, guys, you're his. Okay? We see John 8:34 through 36. Yeshua said, truly, truly, I say to you, everyone practicing sin is a servant of sin. But the servant does not remain in the house forever, but the Son remains forever. Therefore, if the Son sets you free, you are free indeed. Sin is here, but once you are redeemed, sin must flee. And so, though sin is in the house, it doesn't last forever. Because there is a day coming when sin will have a reckoning, and it will be no more. You are a bondservant. We know this phrase, a bondservant, right? What does a bondservant mean? Someone who willingly gave themselves up into servitude. Bondservants. This is why we read in Romans 6, verses 16 through 19, it says, that which you serve, you are a servant to. Sounds redundant, doesn't it? But it's true. He says, if you serve sin, then you are a slave to sin. But once you have been redeemed and set free from the slavehood of sin, you are now a slave to righteousness. See, you are a servant of one or the other. And if you think within yourself that you don't like that, then that's called pride. And that needs to be checked anyway. You are either a servant of sin or a servant of righteousness. That which you yield yourself to, that's what you are. You can't profess, well, I'm this, and go off running to do something else. Right? Leviticus 25. I thought we did this? Yeah, we didn't finish the verse. This is bringing it all back around. 25:55. For it is to me that the people of Israel are servants. They are my servants whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. I am Yahweh your God. He says, if he redeemed us, he is the one we serve. And so let's do it with joy. Let's do it with gladness. Understand the Jubilee. Guys, without the foundation of the word that was established, there would be no Jubilee. Because it was in God's word of how we are to have that framework to do that to one another. If we're just left to ourselves, it would be a very selfish society. That's why we need boundaries. A people without boundaries is anarchy. You don't want complete and total freedom. You want freedom that has boundaries. Because the boundaries is the way of life to teach us how to go to a common place, and that is to Yahweh himself. You are his, and let's serve him with all of our heart, with all of our soul, and all of our might. Amen?